The lights in the meeting room were bright and cold. Meridian Prime Space Station hung in the darkness between 3 star systems, a place where no single species could claim control. Inside the station's largest conference room, beings from Slash forums across the galaxy sat around a massive oval table, made of polished metal that reflected their strange forms. General Thaxiver stood at the head of the table, his 7-foot frame covered in natural armor that looked like black metal plates. His forearms moved as he spoke, and his voice carried the authority of someone who had never been questioned. The Zephyrian Empire had sent their best military commander, and everyone in the room knew it. "The Void Syndicate grows stronger each day," Thaxiver said, his yellow eyes scanning the room. "Their ships attack our trade routes. Their soldiers board our stations. We must unite or fall one by one." Round the table, other species nodded in agreement. The Nexari representative looked like a walking crystal sculpture, her body catching the light and throwing rainbow patterns on the walls. Sharp angles made up her face, and when she moved, tiny chimes rang out. "The Nexari Collective agrees," she said in a voice like breaking glass. "We will contribute our crystal technology and our ability to shape matter itself." War Chief Gorin of the Corvin clans slammed his massive fist on the table, making everyone jump. He was built like a bear that had learned to walk upright, covered in thick brown fur and muscles that bulged under his ceremonial armor. "The Corvin will fight," he roared. "Our warriors fear nothing. Give us ships and we will crush these void dogs." Other voices joined in around the table. The insect-like Chitauri clicked their agreement in their strange language. The floating gas beans, called the ethereals, pulsed with different colors to show they would help. Even the small but wealthy merchant guild promised to fund the war effort. Looked pleased. This alliance would bring together the strongest species in the galaxy. The Zephyrians had speed and natural armor. The Nexari could build weapons from pure crystal. The Corvins were the strongest fighters anyone had ever seen. The Chitauri could survive in space without suits. The ethereals could phase through solid matter. "Excellent," Thaxiver said. "With such power united, the Void Syndicate will fall within a year. Now we must discuss command structure and battle tactics." Just then, the main door to the conference room opened with a soft hiss. 3 figures walked in, and the room fell quiet. They were small compared to everyone else present. The tallest barely reached 6 feet, and they looked fragile next to the armored and dangerous beings already seated. "Sorry we're late," said the woman leading the group. She had dark hair pulled back in a simple style and wore a plain blue uniform with small metal badges. "I'm Ambassador Lisa Rodriguez, representing Earth and the Human Colonial Defense Force." The room stayed quiet, but not in a respectful way. Several beings exchanged glances that clearly said these newcomers were not impressive. General Thaxiver looked down at the humans with something close to amusement. "Humans," he said slowly, as if tasting the word. "Yes, we received your message about joining our alliance. Please sit." Rodriguez moved to the 3 empty chairs that had been placed at the far end of the table, almost like an afterthought. The man beside her was even smaller than she was, barely reaching 5 feet and 8 inches. He had the lean build of someone who stayed in shape but would never be called muscular. His uniform was simple green fabric, with no decorations except a name tag that read Martinez in stripes that showed his rank. "This is Staff Sergeant Jake Martinez," Rodriguez said, "and Technical Specialist Ben Clark." The third human nodded politely. He looked like he spent most of his time working with computers rather than fighting. War Chief Gorin leaned forward, squinting at the humans. "These are your warriors?" he asked, his voice full of doubt. "They look like children." "I assure you," Rodriguez said calmly, "humanity is serious about contributing to this alliance." General Thaxiver S4 Arms gestured dismissively. "What could your species possibly offer? You have no natural armor like the Zephyrians. You cannot shape matter like the Nexari. You lack the strength of the Corvins or the special abilities of the other species here." Martinez spoke for the first time, his voice quiet but clear. "We adapt." Thaxiver blinked his yellow eyes slowly. "Adapt?" "Yes, sir," Martinez replied. "Humans are good at adapting to new situations. Several beings around the table made sounds that might have been laughter in their various languages. The Nexari representative chimed softly, which sounded almost musical but somehow mocking. Adaptation is what weak species do when they cannot fight properly, she said. Rodriguez kept her expression neutral, but her jaw tightened slightly. Perhaps we could demonstrate our capabilities rather than simply discuss them. Demonstrate, Thaxfer repeated. How would you propose to do that?
Oh.
Ben Clark spoke up, his voice carrying the patience of someone used to explaining technical things to people who didn't understand. Every species here has shown holographic displays of their abilities. Combat footage, strength tests, technological demonstrations, but humans prefer practical examples. War Chief Gorin laughed, a sound like rocks falling down a mountain. Want a practical demonstration? It's very well, let us see what these tiny humans can do. The room buzzed with excited conversation as the various species began discussing what kind of test would be appropriate. Some suggested a simple strength contest, which would obviously favor the Corvins. Others mentioned speed trials, where the Zephyrians would dominate. The Nexari proposed a technology demonstration, confident in their crystal-based systems. General Thaxvar raised one of his four hands for silence. We will use the station's combat simulator, he announced. Each species will select their finest warrior for a series of battle scenarios. This will show us who truly deserves a place in our alliance. Around the table, the various representatives began selecting their champions. The choice was obvious for most species. Thaxavor would represent the Zephyrians himself, his confidence clear in every movement of his armored form. War Chief Gorin volunteered immediately for the Corvins, eager to show off his strength. The Nexari chose their tactical specialist, a being whose crystalline form seemed to shift and change as she moved. All eyes turned to the human delegation. Rodriguez looked at her two companions, and after a moment of silent communication nodded toward Martinez. Staff Sergeant Martinez will represent humanity, she said simply. The room fell silent again, but this time the silence was filled with barely contained amusement. Beings who had been taking the discussion seriously now looked like they were trying not to laugh openly. Martinez sat quietly in his chair, showing no reaction to the obvious mockery around him. Thaxfer looked down at the small human soldier and shook his head slowly. Are you certain this will not be a game or a simulation for entertainment? Combat scenarios are designed to test real military capabilities. I'm certain, Rodriguez replied. Very well, Thaxfer said. But do not blame us when your representative is eliminated in the first few minutes. Perhaps then you will understand that this alliance is for serious military powers, not species that hope to hide behind others.
Martinez
finally looked up. At the towering Zephyrian general, its expression was calm, almost relaxed. When do we start? He asked. The question hung in the air like a challenge, though Martinez had spoken in the same quiet tone he had used throughout the meeting. For just a moment, something flickered in Thaxavor's yellow eyes. It's not concern exactly, but perhaps the first tiny seed of uncertainty. But the moment passed quickly. The general's confidence returned, and he gestured toward the door with one of his armored hands. The combat simulator is on Deck 7. It will begin immediately. As the various beings began filing out of the conference room, heading toward what they all assumed would be a quick and decisive demonstration of human inadequacy, none of them noticed the small smile that briefly crossed Jake Martinez's face. It was the kind of smile that came from knowing something others. The Alliance was about to learn their first lesson about humanity, though they didn't know it yet. The combat simulator room was huge, taking up most of Deck 7. White walls curved up to meet a ceiling covered in projectors and sensors. In the center sat 4 metal chairs surrounded by holographic equipment that hummed with quiet energy. Technicians from various species worked at control panels. Preparing the simulation systems, General Thaxfer strode into the room like he owned it, his forearms gesturing as he examined the equipment. This simulator can create any environment, he explained to the gathered representatives. Space stations, planet surfaces, asteroid fields, even the interior of ships. The scenarios feel completely real to those inside. War Chief Gorin flexed his massive arms and grinned, showing teeth that looked like they could bite through metal. Good. I want to feel the impact when I crush my enemies. The Nixari representative, Shard Singer Zix, moved closer to examine the holographic projectors. Her crystalline body caught the light and threw sparkling patterns across the walls. Impressive technology, she chimed. Though not as advanced as our crystal matrix systems. Martinez walked quietly around the room, his hands clasped behind his back. He looked at everything but said nothing. The other species barely noticed him, too busy discussing their own capabilities and strategies. The first scenario will be simple, announced the lead technician, a spider-like Chitauri whose multiple eyes blinked in sequence. Close quarters combat in a space station corridor. This simulates the boarding actions common in our war against the Void Syndicate. Thaxver nodded approvingly. Perfect. Tight spaces favor speed and armor. The Zephyrian advantage will be clear. Rodriguez stepped forward from where she had been watching quietly. What are the rules exactly? The technician's eyes focused on her one by one. Each participant will spawn in different sections of a mock station. The objective is to reach the central command center and hold it for 60 seconds while eliminating any opposition. The simulation tracks all damage and movement. When a participant takes fatal damage, they are eliminated. Weapons? Asked Ben Clark. Standard equipment for each species, the technician replied. What your military would normally carry into such a situation? General Thaxver looked pleased. This was exactly the kind of combat where Zephyrian superiority would shine. Fast movement through corridors, natural armor to absorb damage, and forearms to handle multiple weapons. He began removing his ceremonial cloak, revealing the black armor plates that covered his body from neck to feet. War Chief Gorn was already stripping down to his combat harness, showing off muscles that looked like they were carved from stone. I will need no weapons beyond these, he said, making fists the size of dinner plates. Shardsinger Zix began to shift and change, her crystalline form flowing like liquid glass. Sharp edges appeared along her arms and back, turning her body into a living weapon. The Nexari required no external tools, she chimed. We are the weapon. All eyes turned to Martinez, who was calmly checking his equipment. He wore standard human military gear, nothing special or advanced. A basic kinetic rifle hung across his back. Simple body armor covered his chest, and a few pouches on his belt held what looked like ordinary supplies. That's it? Gorin asked, pointing at Martinez's equipment. No power armor? No energy weapons? No genetic enhancements? This is standard Colonial Defense Force loadout? Martinez replied simply. The aliens exchanged glances. Some looked amused, others seemed almost embarrassed for the humans. How could any species survive in a hostile galaxy with such basic equipment? Perhaps Thaxver said slowly, we should modify the scenario to be more fair. Give the human additional equipment or allies. Ambassador Rodriguez shook her head. That won't be necessary. Sergeant Martinez prefers to work with familiar gear. The technician gestured toward the 4 chairs. Please take your positions. The simulation will begin in 30 seconds. The 4 champions moved to their chairs. Thaxavor settled his armored form with practiced ease, clearly familiar with military simulations. Gorin had to adjust his chair to accommodate his massive frame. Zix flowed onto her chair like living water finding its shape. Martinez sat down last, his movements economical and precise. He closed his eyes for a moment, taking a deep breath. When he opened them again, his expression had changed subtly. The quiet, polite soldier was gone, replaced by someone who looked completely alert and focused. Simulation beginning, announced the technician, spawning participants now. The room filled with light as the holographic systems activated. The 4 chairs seemed to disappear as the simulation took over, creating the illusion that the champions were standing in different parts of a damaged space station. On the viewing screens around the room, the observers could see 4 different perspectives. General Thaxaver appeared in what looked like a main corridor, his yellow eyes scanning for threats. War Chief Gorin stood in a cargo bay, already moving toward the nearest exit. Shardsinger Zix materialized in an engineering section, her crystalline form adapting to the environment, and Martinez found himself in what appeared to be a maintenance area. surrounded by pipes and access panels. Like the others, he didn't immediately start moving toward the objective. Instead, he stood perfectly still for several seconds, listening and watching. "What is the human doing?" asked one of the observers. "The others are already moving." Ben Clark, watching from the side of the room, simply smiled. "He's thinking." On screen, Thaxfer was making impressive progress. Natural speed allowed him to cover ground quickly, and his armor absorbed the simulated weapons fire from automated defenses without slowing him down. He moved through the corridors with the confidence of someone who had done this many times before. Goran was taking a more direct approach, literally smashing through obstacles that would stop other species. Bulkhead doors, defensive barriers, even walls seemed to crumble before his massive strength. His route toward the objective was the shortest possible, a straight line of destruction. Zix was being more tactical, using her ability to reshape her crystalline form to create tools and weapons as needed. She formed a cutting blade to slice through a locked door, then shifted into a defensive configuration when automated turrets opened fire. Martinez finally began to move, but not in the direction the others expected. Instead of heading directly toward the command center, he began exploring the maintenance areas. His movements were careful and deliberate, like someone who was mapping out the entire station in his mind. "He's going the wrong way," observed the Chitauri technician. "The objective is in the center of the station." Rodriguez watched her sergeant's progress with interest. "Is he?" On the screens, the first encounter was about to happen. Thaxiver and Goran were approaching the same corridor from different directions, their paths converging near a major intersection. Both were moving fast, confident in their abilities. They rounded the corner at almost the same moment and stopped, facing each other across 20 feet of empty corridor. For a second, neither moved. Then Goran grinned and charged, his massive form barreling down the corridor like a living battering ram. Thaxfer's response was lightning quick. He dropped low and used his superior speed to dodge to the side, then came up behind the Corvin with all four arms ready to strike. But Goran had anticipated this, spinning around with surprising agility for someone so large. The two champions clashed in the middle of the corridor, Goran's raw strength against Thaxfer's speed and armor. It was an impressive display of combat skill from both species. The observers watched with fascination as the two warriors fought with techniques perfected over centuries of warfare. But while they were focused on this dramatic battle, something else was happening on the fourth screen. Martinez had found something. In the maintenance areas, something the others had missed. He was no longer exploring aimlessly. Now he was moving with purpose, following a route that none of the observers understood. "Where is he going?" asked Shardsinger Zix, who had paused her own advance to watch the human's strange behavior. The answer came a few seconds later. Martinez emerged from an access tunnel directly behind Zix's position. He had used the station's maintenance systems to bypass the main corridors entirely, moving through spaces that the simulation's creators had included for realism, but never expected anyone to actually use. Zix sensed movement behind her and began to turn, her crystalline form shifting into a defensive posture. But she was too late. Martinez was already moving, and his approach was unlike anything the observers had ever seen. He didn't attack Zix directly. Instead, he did something that made several of the alien observers gasp in surprise. He had studied the engineering section where Zix was positioned, and he knew exactly which systems controlled the environmental settings in that area. 3 quick shots from his kinetic rifle hit specific control panels. The lights went out, emergency. Systems activated, and the artificial gravity in that section began to fluctuate wildly. Zix, who had been prepared for direct combat, suddenly found herself dealing with an environment that was changing faster than she could adapt to. In the chaos that followed, Martinez moved like he had been born in zero gravity, while Zix struggled to maintain her form in the shifting gravitational fields. He used the confusion to eliminate her with clinical precision. Martinez moved through the ceiling access shaft with the silence of a shadow. Below him, The sound of combat echoed through the metal walls as General Thaxer and War Chief Gorin continued their fierce battle. Neither warrior knew they were being watched from above. In the observation room, the alien representatives stared at their screens in growing confusion. The small human had already eliminated Shardsinger Zix using tactics none of them had ever seen before. Now he was moving through parts of the space station that most of them didn't even know existed. "This is impossible," muttered the Chitauri technician, his multiple eyes blinking rapidly. The simulation was designed for direct combat, not this. Sneaking around in maintenance areas, Ambassador Rodriguez kept her expression neutral, but inside she felt a familiar sense of pride. She had seen Jake Martinez in action before, and she knew the other species were about to learn something important about human warfare. On the main screen, Thaxfer landed a solid hit on Gorin's shoulder, his armored fist striking with enough force to crack stone. But the massive Corvin barely flinched, grabbing the Zephyrian's arm and spinning him around like a toy. Both warriors were skilled, both were powerful, and both were completely focused on each other. Neither of them looked up. Martinez had positioned himself directly above the fighting, watching through a maintenance grate. He could have dropped down and attacked either warrior while they were distracted. That's what the observers expected him to do. That's what any normal soldier would have done. Instead, Martinez did something that made the watching aliens question everything they thought they knew about combat. He started working on the station's environmental systems. The corridor where Thaxfer and Gorin were fighting had multiple control panels along the walls. Life support, gravity controls, atmospheric, processors, emergency systems. Martinez had studied the station's blueprint during his earlier exploration, and he knew exactly which systems controlled which functions. From his position in the ceiling, Martinez couldn't reach the control panels directly, so he made his own access. 3 precise shots from his kinetic rifle punched through the ceiling grating and struck specific points on the corridor walls below. The first shot hit the gravity control system. Suddenly, the section of corridor where the 2 warriors were fighting shifted from normal gravity to zero gravity. Both Thaxfer and Gorin found themselves floating, their fighting styles completely disrupted. The second shot struck the atmospheric control panel. Emergency fog began pouring into the corridor, thick white vapor that reduced visibility to almost nothing. The 2 warriors could barely see each other, let alone coordinate their attacks. The third shot was the most clever. It hit the emergency lighting system, but not to turn the lights off. Instead, it activated the strobe lights used during station evacuations. The corridor filled with rapid, disorienting flashes of bright light. In the space of 3 seconds, Martinez had turned a simple corridor into a nightmare of confusion. Zero gravity, thick fog, and strobing lights that made it impossible to track movement or maintain balance. But Martinez wasn't done, while the 2 warriors struggled to adapt. To the chaotic environment he had created, Martinez dropped through the ceiling grate. But he didn't drop randomly. He had calculated the exact position where he needed to be, and he fell with precision that bordered on the impossible. He landed directly between the 2 floating warriors, using their own bodies to control his descent. His feet touched Gorin's back for just a moment, giving him the leverage to push off and redirect his movement toward Thaxfer. The Zephyrian general saw Martinez coming through the fog and strobing lights, but he was still adapting to the zero gravity. His usual speed was useless when he had nothing to push against. He tried to bring his forearms up to defend himself, but Martinez was already inside his guard. What happened next lasted only seconds, but every alien in the observation room would remember it for the rest of their lives. Martinez didn't try to overpower Thaxfer. He didn't attempt to match the general's strength or speed. Instead, he used the zero-gravity environment like a tool. He grabbed onto Thax's armor and used the Zephyrian's own mass to spin both of them in a controlled rotation. As they spun, Martinez positioned his rifle and fired once. The shot struck a specific point on Thaxifer's armor, not to penetrate it, but to redirect their rotation. Now they were spinning toward one of the corridor walls, and Martinez used the impact to separate himself from the general while sending Thaxiver tumbling helplessly through the fog. Possible, breathed one. Of the observers, he's using physics like a weapon. But Martinez wasn't finished with General Thaxiver yet. As the Zephyrian struggled to regain control in the zero gravity, Martinez had already calculated his next move. He fired his rifle again, but this time at the wall behind Thaxiver. The kinetic round struck the metal surface and ricocheted exactly the angle Martinez had intended. The ricocheting bullet struck Thaxiver's armor again. It's not hard enough to cause damage, but with enough force to send him spinning toward a specific point on the corridor wall. Martinez had turned the entire corridor into a three-dimensional pool table. Using ricochets and momentum to control where his enemies moved, Thaxiver hit the wall near an emergency control panel, and Martinez was already moving to intercept him. The general tried to push off from the wall and escape, but Martinez had anticipated this too. Another precisely aimed shot created a ricochet that pushed Thaxiver directly into Martinez's waiting hands. In the strobing emergency lights, through the thick fog in zero gravity, Martinez eliminated General Thaxiver. The combination of skill and environmental manipulation that left the observers speechless. Zephyrian champion eliminated, announced the simulation system. Now only Martinez and Goran remained. But the Corvan war chief had been watching the entire exchange with growing amazement. Even through the confusion of fog and strobing lights, he had seen enough to understand that he was facing something completely unprecedented. "You fight like a ghost," Goran called out through the fog, his deep voice echoing off the metal walls. "But I am not afraid of ghosts." Martinez said nothing. He was already moving, using the zero gravity to propel himself through the fog-filled corridor. But he wasn't moving toward Goran. He was moving toward the corridor's exit, toward the central command center that was the objective of the simulation. Goran realized what was happening and tried to follow. But moving in zero gravity required skills that his people had never needed to develop. The Corvans were ground fighters, used to using their massive strength against solid opponents on solid ground. In zero gravity, Goran's strength was almost useless. Martinez reached the corridor exit and used the doorframe to launch himself toward the command center. But as he moved, he fired several more shots at the environmental control panels. The fog began to clear, the strobing lights stopped, and normal gravity slowly returned to the corridor. Goran dropped to the floor with a heavy thud as gravity reasserted itself. He looked around the now clear corridor and saw the path Martinez had taken. The war chief grinned, despite himself. This human had shown him tactics he had never imagined, and Goran respected skill even in an enemy. "Clever little ghost," Goran muttered, then began running toward the command center with ground-shaking steps. But Martinez had a significant head start, and he was using it wisely. The route to the command center led through several more corridors and chambers, each with their own environmental controls and defensive systems. The human had studied the entire station layout, and he knew exactly how to use every feature to his advantage. When Goran reached the command center entrance, he found it sealed with an emergency lockdown. The massive Corvan could have smashed through the door with his bare hands, but it would take time. Time that Martinez was using to complete the simulation objective. Through the sealed door, Goran could hear the sound of the human working at the command center controls. The objective was to hold the central position for 60 seconds. Martinez had already been inside for 30 seconds. Goran began pounding on the door with his massive fists, each blow sending shockwaves through the station's structure. But the door was designed to withstand explosive decompression and armed boarding parties. Even Corvan's strength would need time to break through. 45 seconds, announced the simulation system. Goran roared in frustration and doubled his efforts. But it was too late. The door finally gave way just as the simulation timer reached 0. Objective completed, human champion victorious. The observation room fell completely silent. On the screens, they could see Martinez standing calmly in the command center, his rifle lowered and his breathing steady. He looked like he had just completed a routine training exercise, not eliminated 3 of the galaxy's most feared warriors. General Thaxiver was the first to speak, his voice quiet with something that might have been awe. Martinez looked up at the camera, knowing the others were watching. His answer was simple and direct. I used what was available. But in the observation room, the alien representatives were beginning to understand that they had witnessed something far more significant than a simple combat demonstration. They had seen a completely different approach to warfare. The simulation chamber powered down, and the 4 chairs became visible again. Martinez opened his eyes and sat up slowly, checking his equipment with the same calm precision he had shown throughout the entire exercise. Around him, the other 3 champions were emerging from their own simulations. But their expressions were very different from when they had started. General Thaxfer pulled off his neural interface headset and stared at it like it had betrayed him. His 4 arms hung limply at his sides, and his yellow eyes kept shifting between the headset and the small human who was now standing up from his chair. War Chief. Goran sat in his chair for a long moment, his massive hands gripping the armrest so tightly the metal groaned. When he finally stood, he moved like someone who had just discovered that everything he believed about combat was wrong. Schartzinger Zix was the most visibly shaken. Her crystalline form kept shifting colors, flashing from deep blue to angry, red to confused purple. The harmonic chiming that came from her movements sounded discordant and off-key, but it was the silence in the observation room that truly showed how much the demonstration had changed things. Representatives from a dozen species stood frozen, staring at the screens that still showed the final moments of the simulation. No one spoke, no one moved. They were all trying to process what they had just witnessed. Martinez walked over to a water dispenser in the corner of the simulation room and filled a small cup. He drank it slowly, giving the others time to collect themselves. When he turned back to face the room, his expression was as calm and polite as it had been when they first met. "Thank you for the opportunity to demonstrate," he said simply. Those words broke the spell that had fallen over the observation room. Suddenly everyone was talking at once, their voices mixing into a chaos of different languages and emotional responses. It's impossible. How did he move like that? The environmental controls, how did he know? No warrior fights that way. It was like he turned the station into a weapon. Ambassador Rodriguez stepped forward, her voice cutting through the noise. "If I may address some of your questions." The room gradually fell quiet again, though many of the representatives continued to stare at Martinez like he was some kind of dangerous puzzle they couldn't solve. General Staxfer was the first to speak directly. "That was not combat," he said slowly. "That was something else entirely. I have fought for 30 years, against dozens of species, and I have never seen anything like what you just did." Martinez nodded respectfully. "You fight very well, General. Your speed and strength are impressive. But you were fighting in an environment designed by engineers, not warriors." "What does that mean?" asked Schartzinger Zix, her crystalline form still shifting through nervous colors. Ben Clark stepped forward. Adjusting his glasses, "It means that Sergeant Martinez approached the simulation differently than you did. You saw a combat scenario. You saw a complex system with multiple variables that could be manipulated." War Chief Goran frowned, his heavy brow creasing. "Speak in riddles. Explain this in simple terms." Martinez moved to stand beside one of the simulation displays, which still showed a 3-dimensional map of the space station they had fought in. "Every environment has rules," he began, pointing. 2 different sections of the station: gravity, atmosphere, lighting, structural integrity, power distribution. Most warriors learn to fight within those rules. Humans learn to change the rules. He touched the display, highlighting the corridor where he had fought Thaxfer and Goran. "This corridor has gravity generators, atmospheric controls, emergency lighting systems. You saw walls and obstacles. I saw tools." The Chitauri technician clicked his mandibles nervously. "But how did you know which systems to target?" "The station schematic was not provided." "I mapped it myself," Martinez replied. "During the first few minutes of the simulation, while you were rushing toward the objective, I explored the maintenance areas. Every station built by spacefaring species follows similar design principles: life support systems, power distribution, emergency protocols. Once you understand the patterns, you can predict how any station will function." One of the ethereal representatives pulsed a deep orange color, which their translator converted to speech. "This implies your species studies our engineering specifically." To exploit it in combat, Rodriguez shook her head. Not specifically, no. But humans learn to adapt to any environment they encounter. We study systems because understanding systems helps us survive. General Thaxper was pacing now, his armored feet clicking against the metal floor. This changes everything, he muttered. If your soldiers can turn our own technology against us, how can any species defend itself? You're missing the point, Martinez said quietly. I wasn't trying to defeat your technology. I was trying to complete the mission using whatever tools were available. The station's systems weren't weapons until I needed them to be weapons. Ben Clark pulled up another display, this one showing statistics from the simulation. Look at the resource usage data, he said. Sergeant Martinez fired fewer shots than any other participant. He used less energy, moved more efficiently, and completed the objective in less time. This isn't about overpowering anyone. It's about being more efficient. War Chief Gorin studied the numbers with obvious confusion, but efficiency in combat means nothing if you cannot strike hard enough to defeat your enemy? Does it? Martinez asked. General Thaxper, how much damage did I actually inflict on you during our encounter? The Zephyrian general thought for a moment, then his eyes widened slightly. Almost none. The simulation registered my elimination, but you never actually attacked me directly. Exactly. I didn't defeat you. I used the environment to neutralize. There's a difference. Shardsinger Zix chimed a series of notes that sounded like confusion mixed with fascination. You turned the corridor into a trap. But you couldn't have known we would fight there. Martinez smiled slightly. I didn't know where you would fight. I knew that eventually someone would end up in that corridor, and when they did, I wanted to be ready to control the environment they were fighting in. The implications of this statement sent another wave of silence through the room. The alien representatives were beginning to understand that they hadn't just witnessed unusual tactics. They had seen a completely different philosophy of warfare. Species doesn't just adapt to environments, observed the Nexari representative. You control them. We work with them, Martinez corrected. Everything in the universe follows certain rules. Physics, engineering, biology, psychology. Humans learned long ago that fighting against those rules is less effective than learning to use them. Ambassador Rodriguez decided it was time to reveal something that would put the demonstration in proper context. There's something you should understand about Earth and human military development. Our planet isn't just our home. It's been trying to kill us for our entire evolutionary history. The room's attention focused on her completely. She continued, Earth has ice ages, volcanic eruptions, earthquakes, hurricanes, floods, droughts, diseases, and predators that are bigger and stronger than humans. We survived not by being the strongest or fastest or most heavily armored. We survived by being the most adaptable, Ben Clark added. Every human military conflict has been fought between groups that had access to the same basic technology and environments. We couldn't rely on natural advantages because we were fighting other humans. So we learned to create advantages from whatever was available. General Thaxper stopped pacing and fixed Martinez with an intense stare. He said earlier that humans adapt. But this goes beyond adaptation. This is manipulation of reality itself. Reality is just a set of rules, Martinez replied. The trick is learning which rules you can bend and which ones you can't. A new voice entered the conversation. The lead representative from the merchant guild, a short, round being covered in expensive fabrics, had been quiet throughout the entire demonstration. Now she spoke with the careful tone of someone who understood economics better than warfare. I have a question, she said. This demonstration was impressive, but it was still just one human against 3 opponents in a controlled environment. How do we know this represents the true capabilities of your species' military? The question hung in the air like a challenge. Around the room, representatives nodded slightly. They had been impressed by what they had seen, but they were also practical beings who knew that one exceptional individual didn't necessarily represent an entire species' capabilities. Ambassador Rodriguez exchanged a glance with Martinez and Ben Clark. Then she made a decision that would change the course of the alliance negotiations. Would you like to see a real demonstration? She asked. Before anyone could answer, she activated her personal communicator. Rodriguez to Colonial. Fleet Command. Please transmit the Kepler Station incident files to our current location. Authorization code 77 Alpha. The room's main display activated, showing the Meridian Prime Communications network connecting to Earth's military databases. Within seconds, new information began flowing across the screens. 3 months ago, Rodriguez began, the Void Syndicate attacked a human mining station in the Kepler system. The station had a crew of 1,200 civilians and a security force of 30 soldiers. The main display filled with images of Kepler Station, a mining facility that hung in space like a metal flower. Multiple arms extended from a central hub, each one dedicated to processing asteroids for rare metals. It looked peaceful and industrial. Nothing like a battlefield. Kepler Station housed 1,200 civilian miners and their families, Ambassador Rodriguez explained as the footage began. The security force consisted of 30 colonial defense soldiers. Standard protection. For a remote mining operation, the peaceful scene on the screen suddenly changed. Dark ships appeared at the edge of the system, moving fast toward the station. The alien representatives recognized the design immediately. Void Syndicate raiders, sleek and predatory, built for quick strikes and boarding actions. 200. Syndicate warriors, Rodriguez continued. Elite troops with advanced weapons and armor. By every military calculation, Kepler Station should have fallen in less than an hour. General Thaxfer leaned forward, studying the approaching enemy ships. Those are Syndicate assault vessels. I have fought them before. They carry 20 warriors, each all veterans of dozens of raids. On screen, the Syndicate ships reached the station and began their attack. Cutting beams sliced through the station's outer hull, while boarding pods fired like bullets toward the docking bays. Within minutes, enemy soldiers were pouring into Kepler Station, but something was wrong with what the aliens expected to see. War Chief Gorin frowned at the display. Where is the panic? Where are the civilians running in terror? The footage showed. Corridors inside the station, but instead of chaos and fear, there was organized movement. Civilians were moving calmly through predetermined routes, following evacuation procedures that looked well rehearsed, and the security soldiers were not where anyone expected them to be. The Syndicate forces entered through 12 different breach points, Rodriguez narrated. They expected to find defenders waiting at each entrance. Instead, they found empty corridors. The alien representatives watched in confusion as Syndicate warriors advanced through the station, meeting no resistance. The raiders moved in standard formation, clearing rooms and corridors with professional efficiency. But there was no one to fight. This makes no sense, muttered Shardsinger Zix. Where are the human defenders? Ben Clark smiled and pointed to a section of the display that showed a three-dimensional map of the station. Watch the maintenance areas. At first, the aliens saw nothing unusual. Then gradually, they began to notice tiny movements in the spaces between the main corridors. The human defenders were not meeting the Syndicate head-on. They were moving through the station's infrastructure like ghosts. The first Syndicate casualties appeared on screen without warning. A squad of 5 raiders was advancing down a main corridor when suddenly their leader simply collapsed. No visible attack, no energy blast. Nothing the aliens could identify. The other raiders looked around in confusion, trying to find an enemy. That wasn't there. Then the lights went out. Emergency lighting kicked in, casting everything in red shadows. In the dim light, the remaining 4 Syndicate warriors began firing at shadows, their fear obvious even through their armor. One by one, they fell to attacks that came from directions they couldn't predict or defend against. How? Asked the Chitauri technician, his multiple eyes blinking rapidly. How are the humans eliminating trained warriors without being seen? The answer came as the camera view switched to show what was happening inside the station's walls. The human defenders had turned the entire mining facility into a three-dimensional battlefield. They moved through air ducts, maintenance tunnels, and service corridors that connected every part of the station. More importantly, they had taken control of the station's systems. Kepler Station was a mining facility, Martinez explained quietly. It had industrial equipment designed to cut through asteroids, move massive amounts of material, and process raw ore. The human defenders turned all of that equipment into weapons. On screen, a group of Syndicate raiders was advancing through what looked like a cargo bay. Suddenly, massive mechanical arms designed for moving or containers swung down from the ceiling. The raiders scattered, but they were now separated and confused, no longer fighting as a coordinated unit. While they struggled to regroup, human soldiers appeared from concealed positions. But these weren't the direct firefights the aliens expected. The humans used the chaos created by the mechanical systems to attack from unexpected angles, then disappeared back into the station's infrastructure before the Syndicate could respond. "This is not warfare," General Thaxfer said slowly. "This is something else entirely." "No, this is human warfare," Rodriguez corrected. "When you cannot match your enemy's strength, you change the nature of the fight itself." The footage continued, showing encounter after encounter where Syndicate forces found themselves fighting not just human soldiers, but the station itself, mining lasers that had been reprogrammed to fire at specific coordinates. Gravity systems. That created localized fields to disorient attackers. Even the station's atmospheric controls were used as weapons, creating pressure differentials that could knock armored warriors off their feet. But the most impressive part was how the human civilians were integrated into the defense. They weren't just evacuating randomly. They were moving according to a plan that turned their evacuation into part of the defensive strategy. "The civilians are acting as reconnaissance," observed the Nexar representative. They were reporting enemy positions while appearing to flee in panic. "Every human on that station was part of the defense," Ben Clark confirmed. "Children, elderly, workers, families, everyone had a role that contributed to the overall strategy." War Chief Gorin shook his head in amazement. "Among the Corvin, only warriors fight. Civilians flee or hide. But your civilians fight alongside your soldiers." "Our civilians are our soldiers," Martinez said simply. "Every human learns basic survival and defense skills. We cannot afford to have anyone who is completely helpless." The climax of the battle came when the Syndicate forces, frustrated by their inability to engage the human defenders directly, decided to destroy the station's central power core. If they couldn't capture Kepler Station, they would ensure no one else could use it either. A team of 20 elite Syndicate warriors fought their way to the power core chamber, suffering heavy losses, but finally reaching their objective. They began setting explosive charges that would turn the station's power plant into a massive bomb. That was when the aliens watching the footage saw something that would change their understanding of human warfare forever. The 30 human defenders appeared all at once. They didn't charge into the chamber like traditional warriors. They didn't announce themselves or demand surrender. They simply materialized from every possible direction simultaneously. From air vents, maintenance hatches, service tunnels, and concealed positions that seemed to be carved into the walls themselves. The Syndicate warriors, who had been fighting scattered encounters throughout the station, suddenly found themselves facing the entire human defense force in a coordinated assault. But even this wasn't a conventional battle. The humans fought like a single organism with 30 parts. Each soldier seemed to know exactly where every other soldier was, what they were doing, and what they were going to do next. They moved through the chamber like water flowing around obstacles, each action designed to support and amplify the actions of their teammates. In less than 2 minutes, all 20 Syndicate elite warriors were eliminated. The humans secured the chamber, disarmed the explosives, and began coordinating the final cleanup of the remaining raiders throughout the station. The total battle lasted for hours. When it was over, 1,200 human civilians were safe. The station was secure, and 197 of the 200 Syndicate attackers had been eliminated. The human defenders had suffered 3 wounded and 0 killed. The footage ended, leaving the observation room in complete silence. Finally, General Thaxfer spoke, his voice barely above a whisper. "Those 30 soldiers defeated an enemy force that outnumbered them 7-1. Elite enemy soldiers with superior equipment. And they did it while protecting 1,200 civilians. How is this possible?" asked Schertzinger Zix. Ambassador Rodriguez looked around the room at the assembled representatives. "Because humans don't just fight in environments. We become the environment. Every human settlement, Every station, every ship is designed from the beginning to be a defensive system. Our soldiers don't just defend locations. They turn those locations into extensions of themselves. War Chief Goran stood up slowly, his massive frame moving with something that looked like reverence. I understand now. Your species does not just have soldiers. Your entire civilization is a military force. Not military, Martinez corrected gently. Survivor. Everything humans do is designed to help us survive. And sometimes, survival means fighting in ways that other species never consider. The implications of what they had seen began to sink in around the room. The alien representatives were realizing that they hadn't just invited another species to join their alliance. They had encountered something unprecedented in galactic history.